recording. All good. Welcome everybody on this, for Edinburgh, slightly hot and sticky day, for the penultimate in our 23-24 series of IAHS Work in Progress talks. For those who don't know me, I am Dr. Ben Fletcher-Watson, Deputy Director here at IAHS, and today we are delighted to have with us Dr. Mohammed Rafiq Nuzakir, the IAHS Al-Walid Postdoctoral Fellow for 23-24. Rafiq is a lecturer in the Department of International Relations at the Universitas Muhammadiyah Yogyakarta in Indonesia. He holds degrees from Al-Azhar University of Egypt, Gadjah Mada University in Indonesia, and Arizona State University in the US. His wide research interests include political thought, legal thought, and anthropology, and while he's with us here at IAHS this year, his project is called The Impact of Modernity and Colonialism on Islamic Ethics and Legal Thought. So we are recording today's talk, but as usual we won't record the Q&A. For those of you who are watching online, please feel free to post any questions for Rafiq in the chat, and then we'll come to you afterwards. You can also use the raise hand button to ask a question in person. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Rafiq for his seminar, Decolonial Critiques on the Modernization of Islamic Juristic Theories. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Ben. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining my seminar today, online, in person. I'd like to begin by expressing my sincere and deep gratitude to, first and foremost, to IAHS for incredible opportunity given to me as a fellow at this wonderful institution. Thank you for Professor Leslie, Dr. Ben, Pauline, Lauren, and please forgive me if I miss names. Thank you for their support during my fellowship. Also, thank you for Al-Walid Center for also giving me support during my research. I will also mention my home institution, Universitas Muhammadiyah Yogyakarta. Thank you for allowing me to take this 10-month leave to pursue my research. So, during my fellowship, I've been working on 2 projects of article. Number 1 is the ethic and critique toward unjust ruler, the post-Arab Spring phenomenon, which I already presented in front of Al-Walid. And the second project, which I'm going to present now, is on decolonial critique of modernization of Islamic juristic theories, which is a shared and collaborative project with my friend, Dr. Sarah Buwahida from Al-Walid. And this is still ongoing project. We are still building the, argument and still try to find out our position, and I'm eager to share my progress and look forward to listening to your feedback and suggestion. So my presentation today aims to examine the critiques articulated by Wael Hallaq and Khalid Abdul Fadil, 2 prominent scholars of Islamic law, regarding the modernization and reform of Islamic law undertaken by state elites and Muslim scholars, particularly during the transitional period of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. My research has been guided by the following question. So, number 1, what are the colonial critiques of the modern Islamic legal reformism presented by Wael Hallaq and Khalid Abdul Fadil? Second question is, how do Wael Hallaq and Khalid Abdul Fadil differ in their critiques? And the last one is, what solution do Wael Hallaq and Abdul Fadil propose for implementing Islamic law in modern times, particularly concerning the relation of religion, law, and governance? Basically, the last question is on the issue of implementation of law in modern times. Our tentative argument is the following. Decolonial critiques on the modernization of Islamic juristic theories by Wael Hallaq and Khalid Abdul Fadil advocate for reclaiming traditional legal hermeneutics and re-establishing ethics as the foundation for modern Islamic law. So again, my argument is this is a reclamation of traditional methodology and retrieval of ethics. However, these critics differ in their approach to the concept of the state. Abdul Fadil's suggestions appear more feasible as it doesn't necessarily require restructuring the modern state. The outline of my presentation is the following. I'll start by describing who Wa'al Halaq and Khal Abul Fadl are, and then the web of connection between Orientalism, colonial power, and legal reform, and then I'll describe their critics on the nation-state system, how nation-state system is problematic when it comes to the issue of implementation of Islamic law, and finally their solution, ways of action to implement Islamic law in modern times. So, who is Halaq and who is Abul Fadl? While Halaq is a Palestinian-American scholar, he was born in 1955. He's currently teaching in University of Columbia, and he's coming from a Christian background, same as Edward Said. And he's the author of dozens of articles and books focusing on Islamic law and critics of modern epistemic rupture. And for this research, I used these two books, Sharia, which published in 2009, and The Impossible State, published in 2013. But we also read and see the development of his thought prior to these two writings. He commenced his academic career with a focus on refuting Orientalist reading of the history of Islamic law. Khal Abul Fadl is an Egyptian Kuwaitian American scholar born in 1963, therefore he is 8 years younger than Halaq. And unlike Halaq, who is a pure academic, he is a cleric as well. So he established a research foundation called the Usuli Institute. He's currently working on Quranic exegesis, emphasizing its moral message and addressing common Orientalist and Islamophobic tropes. And why their thought is important to be studied in the first place? We have three reasons. Number one, Halaq and Abul Fadl were chosen because their scholarship have had a profound and dramatic impact on approaches to understanding Islamic law across history, from the formative era through the classical, post-classical periods to modern times. Many of these books have been translated into numerous languages. I tried to search online. I found that it's already translated into Germany, Italy, of course Arabic, Indonesia, Turkish, and probably beyond these languages as well. Nowadays, introductory courses on Islamic law in Western university usually use Halaq's books as reading, replacing the works of earlier generation of Western scholars like Yusuf Shah and Ira Lapidus, which have been used for decades. Their works are fundamentally centered on resistance and critique of the Euro-American discourse on Islamic law. Such a critique is exhaustive, addressing multiple dimensions of the process by which traditional Islamic legal frameworks have been subordinated. The third reason why their thought is important to be studied, these two scholars are selected to illustrate how two distinct intellectual projects aimed at the same purpose, decolonizing Islamic law, offer different perspectives on contemporary realities and propose varied directions for the future. If we may summarize Halaq's main argument regarding modern Islamic law, which also make his thought provocative and controversial, is that Islamic law is incompatible with modernity. In the modern period, Islamic law has suffered from structural death, and he said this in decolonial sense. Abul Fadl's overarching approach to Islamic law is that modernity has caused the epistemological and structural problems, but it is still reversible with Muslims' agency. So you sense the difference in tone. Now, Orientalism, colonial power, and legal reform. Halaq and Abul Fadl expressed shared concerns regarding the interplay between Orientalism, colonial power, and legal reform. They in particular lament the uncritical adoption of Orientalist discourses by the reformist scholars, which in turn significantly influenced the restructuring of Islamic legal frameworks on practical level. The Orientalist discourses have facilitated the codification of Islamic law in Muslim countries in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, and development of utilitarian and liberal legal interpretive approach. So the impact of discourse of Orientalists are three things. Number one is codification, and then the rise of utilitarian and liberal legal approach, which I will come back later. In his treatise on governance, the renowned French political thinker Montesquieu delineated three distinct types of government and their respective legal approaches: republic, monarchy, and despotism. He specifically associated the latter with the Muslim Caliphate, particularly the Ottoman Empire. According to Montesquieu, the absolute authority exercised by caliphs or sultans over Muslim societies gave rise to the concept of Oriental despotism. Halak and Abul Fadl vehemently challenged this simplistic portrayal. Halak argues that Montesquieu's characterization is incompatible with the caliphate system. Historically, central figures such as caliphs and sultans held limited responsibilities, appointing judges, defending borders, mobilizing troops during wartime, overseeing tax collection, and enforcing criminal judgment issued by courts. Islamic governance in the pre-modern period traditionally decentralized authority, placing greater reliance on jurist expertise in legal matters. Another critical perspective propagated by Orientalists concerning Islamic law is the concept of qadi justice, as formulated by famous German sociologist Max Weber. According to him, Islamic legal practices are characterized as unpredictable, irrational, and thus primitive. In this system, judges wield substantial authority and their decisions are perceived to rely heavily on personal discretion, resulting in perceived inconsistencies and incoherence in legal principles. Weber's viewpoint is not unique. It is rooted in colonial Western's observation of Islamic legal tradition and reflects a broader discomfort among colonial elites toward native legal system based on legal pluralism. This sentiment is exemplified in historical contexts such as the initiative undertaken by British governors in India in 18th century, Governor Warren Hastings and Charles Cornwallis, regarding Islamic law on homicide. In pre-colonial Islamic legal traditions, decisions regarding penalties for homicides were entrusted to the closest or larger family of the victim, allowing for options of forgiveness, compensation or blood money, or penalty. Hastings and Cornwallis viewed such practices as incompatible with the norms of legal uniformity enforced by the state, which led to the introduction of Anglo-Muhammadan law in India, replacing the centralized legal framework of the Mughal dynasty. Islamic law, according to these two generals, allowed criminals to escape the capital punishment. This sentiment can also be found in the following statement by William Marsden, died in 1836, a British Orientalist who wrote a book on history of Sumatra. He observed that there is no word in the language of the island which properly and strictly signifies law, nor is there any person or class of persons among the Rejangs regularly invested with legislative powers. Rejang is, I believe, one district in current-day Bengkulu. Please correct me, Dr. Sarah, if I'm wrong. They are governed in their various disputes by a set of long-established customs handed down to them from their ancestors, the authority of which is founded on usage and general consent. The chiefs, in pronouncing their decision, are not heard to say, "So the law directs," but "Such is the custom." This Uneasiness among the Western colonial elites ultimately led to the concrete action of legal codification. The following example, drawn from a case in Indonesia mentioned by Halak, which I have expanded upon with additional data, illustrates this point. Indonesia, formerly known as the Dutch East Indies, is a sprawling archipelago with diverse practices of Islamic law. So as you can see in the screen, Indonesia is a big area, big country. We have 5 major islands, Sumatra, Java, Kalimantan, Sulawesi, and Papua. And in total we have 17,000 islands, including the not inhabited one. We have 3 time zones, the middle, the west, and the east time zone. During the colonial period, Dutch elites initiated the codification of laws, presenting it as a tool to meet the individuals and society in rapidly modernizing world. In reality, however, the purpose of codification was to exert more effective control over the archipelago and enforce law and order effectively or efficiently. The process of codification in Indonesia went through various stages. Criminal law was first introduced for the natives in 1873 by the new Department of Justice in Batavia, T.S. der Kinderen. This criminal code was almost a direct copy of the European Dutch Criminal Code, which is also a direct copy of Napoleonic Criminal Code. In 1918, a new criminal code was introduced, creating separate codes for Europeans and the natives. However, distinction was only superficial as the content of the 2 penal codes was nearly identical. One might ask, what role did Indonesians play in the Dutch judicial reform? As was typically in colonial context, their opinions were never asked, and they played no role in the codification efforts. After gaining independence in 1945, Indonesians preferred the cohesive and codified Western legal tradition over their unwritten customary law. So it is now become their own choice. The government in 1951 even abolished the existence of customary courts. The Dutch Criminal Code remained in effect until 2023, when the National Parliament enacted a new penal code. Just last year, we got a new penal code. The enactment of this new criminal code in 2023 is purportedly intended to reflect the values of Indonesian society while also keeping up with modern advancement, such as digital technology. However, questions arise regarding why it took over a century to revise the code and to what extent this criminal code can break away from its coloniality. These topics, while significant, lies beyond the scope of our research and my presentation today. I need to make a note here that not every codification effort ignore the agency of native of Muslim. The case of the Ottoman is slightly different because the initiative to do codification in 19th century is the initiative came out from the Ottoman sultans and involving the Ottoman scholars. But then the question is that something natural or something taking place because of, trying to catch up to respond to the trend now taking place in the Europe? That is the debate among academia. Another area where Orientalist scholarship stereotypes traditional Islamic law concern the concept of continuity and change within Islamic legal thought. Specifically, the notion of taqlid, following legal precedents, has been used by Western scholars as evidence of stagnation and regression within Islamic jurisprudence. Orientalists like Hamilton A.R. Gibb, he is a scholar from this university, separated between ijtihad, which means creative legal reasoning, and taqlid, or following legal precedent, asserting that the door to ijtihad had been closed since the early times and would remain would remain shut indefinitely. So for Gibb, creative legal reasoning is always stand in contrast with following legal precedent. They are two separate entities, according to Gibb. Building upon Gibb's framework, Joseph Schach, a German Orientalist, argued that Islamic legal tradition had transitioned into a regime of taqlid after the 4th century of Islam or 10th century of Common Era, portraying it as a stagnant and lacking dynamism. Their understanding and discourse have distorted, what I mean by they, Gibb and Joseph Schach, their understanding and discourse have distorted the actual value and function of taqlid. Influenced by Orientalist perspective and driven by desire for the Islamic world to align, to catch up Western norms, the reformist figures such as Al-Afghani, Abdu, and Ridho begin to perpetuate a negative stereotype of taqlid. They argue that taqlid is cause of decline and nothing more than slavish and blind imitation and uncritical adherence to legal precedents. Now, taqlid have a negative meaning. This pejorative view of taqlid, formulated in the early modern period by Orientalists and Reformists, persists today even among Muslim communities, perpetuating enduring myths about Islamic legal tradition. The practical impact of Orientalist discourse on legal inertia or legal conservatism is not merely a historical issue. It continues to have a significant implication today. The intervention of Western scholars extend beyond figures like Hamilton Gibb and Joseph Schach. It also impacts contemporary thought and policy. In a report published by the RAND Corporation, by the way, RAND is American Global Policy think tank, Cheryl Bernard, an American-Austrian writer, novelist, political scientist, and the wife of American ambassador to Afghanistan and Iraq, argued that the West should support modernist and reformist groups when dealing with Muslim societies because their frameworks align with Western interests. And please keep in mind, she wrote this report post 9/11. She labeled traditionalists as conservative society and recommended that the American government cooperate with modernists while ignoring or even suppressing traditionalists. In another word, the West should support those who advocate ijtihad or creative legal thinking because they are open to Western modernity and should reject the proponent of taqlid or following legal tradition. Bernard's suggestion not only highlight the divisive nature of Western scholarship toward Islam, but also reveal the West's ongoing desire to reshape Muslim society to fit its socio-political interests. Both Halak and Khalil Abul Fadl believe that taqlid or following legal tradition serve to indicate loyalty and affiliation to legal school. Essentially, taqlid function to stabilize the law by adhering to precedents unless substantial evidence justifies a change. Taqlid, which also can be translated as legal inertia, characterize all legal traditions, which emphasize stability, predictability, determinacy of law, and the continuity of legal doctrines. However, following legal precedent is not a barrier to arriving at new legal rulings. Halak and Abul Fadl argue that jurists can also engage with legal change when it is necessary. Jurists navigate between continuity with the past and the contextual need for change. But again, change is accepted only when there is a need supported by evidence for it. Halak puts it in the following sentence. For in law, both continuity and change are two sides of the same coin, both involving the reasoned defense of a doctrine with the difference that continuity requires the sustained defense of an established doctrine, while change demands the defense of new or more often less authoritative one. The critics of taqlid is not solely the domain of reformist scholars like Rashid Ridho or Muhammad Abdu. It is also central to the discourse of whom Halak terms religious liberal scholars. So now we have two kinds of scholars whom Halak and Abul Fadl criticize in their discourse: utilitarian and liberal. While utilitarian reformists are characterized by utilitarianism in their tendency, liberals are distinguished by their radical departure from traditional legal hermeneutics. Halak expressed discomfort with the Iranian philosopher Abdul Karim Soros, who exemplifies liberal tendency. He essentialized Islamic law, rejects its long historical tradition, and transposed it into a modern form of positive law in accordance with European social and natural sciences. Similarly, Abul Fadl is uneasy with the Algerian thinker Muhammad Arkun. He advocates two main ideas. Number one is epistemological break with tradition. Sometimes we call it as the project of deconstructing tradition. And second project is the idea of emerging reason. The core of this idea is Arkun's ambition to develop a universal rationality that integrates Western and Eastern epistemologies. However, this seemingly universal reason is none other than Western Enlightenment liberal sensibility. Also, the construction approach advocated by Soros or by Arkun will lead to nothing but nihilism and meaninglessness. More importantly, both Soros and Arkun have developed an epistemological block for Muslims to read their own tradition in favor of Western modernity. Abul Fadl also rejects Abdullah Naim's proposal for secularization in Muslim societies. Naim encouraged that Muslim states should be neutral and public law must be independent from any religious values. State can embrace religious values but through public reasoning, not by virtue of being a religious value. For Abu Fadl, secularism is a concept originating from Western history and can lead to godlessness. Now, two perspectives compared. How do Halak and Abul Fadl differ in their assessment of legal reform? This is the comparison. For Halak, reform is Eurocentric, inherently Eurocentric concept, and intertwined with the project of colonial modernity. For him, the reform is Christian and Protestant concept. Reform entails introducing new elements that displace and even eradicate the traditional legal edifice in Islamic history, and therefore he dismissed entirely the role of Muslim reformists because they are not critical to modernity. There is no value of Muslim reformists according to Halak. But Abu Fadl have different opinion. Reform is not problematic in and of itself because change or legal change is inherent to the Islamic legal tradition. Only liberal reform that is problematic. And finally, he still values the contribution of Muslim reformists and see their potential in creatively negotiate the immutable and mutable parts of the Islamic law. Now, my next topic is the limitation of the nation-state system. This is the summary of their critiques to the concept of nation-state system. Both Halak and Abul Fadl have identified several limitations inherent in the nation-state framework. Halak in particular believed that the difference between pre-modern Islamic governance and modern state is enormous, represented in the issue of separation of power, law and morality, political subject, and globalization and moral economy. But both share four critiques of state system at practical level. So I'm not speaking at the paradigmatic level or philosophical level. I'm not talking about the impact of state at practical level. The first issue is that state replaced the inherent indeterminacy of law with standardized legal code. Prior to the colonial and modern eras, Islamic law was characterized by unique, indeterminate, and fluid nature that embraced diverse legal discourse and practices. This diversity was evident in the multiple jurisprudential schools or madhab, which extended their influence beyond ritualistic practices to substantive areas of law. Within this framework, numerous jurisprudential opinions coexisted and were practically applied in society. So to give an example, if we live in the Mamluk dynasty, for example, and we have legal issue, we want to get the judgment from the court, we go to the court and we will get the judgment based on what we believe, based on what legal school that we follow. So in one mosque in Egypt, for example, they have 4 corners. If you are a follower of Shafi'i, then you go to that court. If you are the follower of Hanafi, you go to that court. Everyone will be judged according to their legal affiliation. So they coexisted and were practically applied in society. Law was also highly adaptable to local needs, with its general principle interpreted differently according to local custom. Nowadays, if you have a legal issue, you go to the court, there will be no choice, only one type of court. Colonialism had significant impact, negative impact on Islamic law. It imposed codification, transforming Islamic law from flexible common law-like system into a rigid civil law system. And this codification took place in all Muslim countries in the modern era, except one country. Guess.
Indonesia.
No, I just mentioned Indonesia, except Saudi Arabia. But Saudi Arabia's strong fortress was eventually crumbled, broken, on December 2023. The civil code came into force. Personal status law was codified 2 years earlier, in 2021. Penal code will come soon. So, again, colonialism largely replaced Islamic law with European legal system, leaving only rituals and family law intact as a token of respect for its sanctity. But even family law was codified by Muslims themselves, modeled after the European Civil Code. To give you more explanation, this is typical classification of contents and arrangements of legal subjects. Typically, legal issues are classified into 4 quarters. The first quarter deals with rituals from purity, prayer, alms tax, fasting, pilgrimage, and this is not touched by colonialism. They are not interested in these issues. And the second one is what we call today civil law, deals with sales, plates, insolvency, interdiction, say sleeping partnership, agricultural lease, rent and hire. These laws have been replaced by code system. And the third one, this one is intact, a book of marriage, dower, a contractual dissolution of marriage. But finally, even though the colonial, elites did not touch this issue, but Muslims themselves codify these laws. And this one, books of torts, the 4th quarter, book of blood money, book of Quranically regulated infractions, has been removed by European Civil Code entirely. The second issue, a state is uprooting the law from its decentralized nature and centering it within the state apparatus. Colonialism reduced the role of Islamic jurists significantly. Before colonial times and the adoption of modern European state system by Muslims, jurists were independent civic leaders. This is an important phrase, civic leaders, playing the major role in governing daily societal affairs. Muslim societies, therefore, is self-governing society. Islamic law is centripetal, centering on community rather than centering on state. In the post-colonial era, the influence of independent jurists significantly declined as necessity emerged. Western-educated legal experts for the interest of state replaced independent traditional scholars in shaping societal norms. So typically, legal students will go to Western university, study law, and when they return home, they change the system. Indonesian students typically, they went to Leiden University in Netherlands, and they are the agents of codification in Indonesia in next period. Jurists have been co-opted as tools only for justifying state policies, further diminishing their independent authority and role in society. The third issue of the state is replacing independent institutions with state-controlled entities. One notorious example of this is nationalization of Al-Azhar in Egypt. This is the oldest and the largest Islamic seminary in the Muslim world. I myself received my traditional legal training from this university. It was established in 10th century of Common Era, very old. During the modern period, Al-Azhar had been co-opted by the state from time to time and finally reached the point in 1961. Prior to this time, Al-Azhar was fairly autonomous institution. It had financial independence through a private endowment fund. So endowment fund is the source of sustenance. However, in 1961, the religious endowment was fully placed under the control of Ministry of Religious Affairs, a process that began in the 19th century but accelerated in the 20th century. And this is not to mention the loss of political independence, which has a greater impact than financial independence. The fourth issue of state is ignoring the specific interests and needs of local communities. An example of this I already mentioned earlier, but I want to reiterate. Pre-modern Islamic law defined homicide as a private crime to be settled by mediation or arbitration and regulated by general guidelines that allow for three options: retaliation, qisas, compensation, and forgiveness. The middle category, which is compensation, is the most commonly practiced in Islamic history. Islamic law dealt with it within communal bounds and in terms set by the community internal interests, needs, and desires. The modern nation-state system has progressively ignored the interests of this community. Finally, course of actions. What are the solutions for this dilemma of incompatibility of the nation-state and Islamic law? What do they offer as a solution? I try to summarize the general argument of Halak, and I make it into 2 points. Number one, he encourages Muslims to start articulating, constructing new forms of governance based on conformist thinking and native imagination. Basically, he's saying this current system is not yours. But what is the concrete solution? We don't know yet. Keep searching, keep finding. It's not a concrete solution. Muslims and their intellectual and political elites must engage with their Western counterparts to convince them that universalism is ultimately unsustainable. This is the proposal from Halak. And what do Abul Fadl offer? I classify his argument into 2 points. First, suggestion to the state, and second, suggestion to jurists. To the state, he suggests that state must embrace virtues, cannot be neutral. We cannot be secular state. But the state cannot adopt a single reified interpretation of law. This is the only applicable law in this country, for example. By saying that you are speaking on behalf of God, you are putting yourself as God. Literally, this is what he means. This is what he's saying in his book. And this is his honest saying or consideration. Reversing codification is nearly impossible, extremely difficult. But the state must allow plurality of interpretation of legal texts and legal practices. Now his suggestion to fellow jurists: you guys must be independent entity. Detach yourself from the state. You must be able to be to balance the state, controlling them by critiquing them. And the jurists must have the ability to undertake proper reform by differentiating mutable and immutable Islamic law. Not everything needs to be changed, not everything needs to be kept. So it is the matter of navigating between mutable and immutable. And also by navigating Islamic law, Islamic legal tradition, meaning mobilizing tradition from the past and just contextualizing according to modern context. Finally, conclusion. Both Halak and Abul Fadl advocate for reclaiming traditional legal hermeneutics. Halak's suggestion of construction of alternative models of governance, i.e. new Islamic governance, is unclear. Thus, many scholars question the practical usability of his suggestions. Abul Fadl's suggestion seems to be more feasible since it doesn't necessarily require the restructuring of the model state. Thank you.
Just stop the recording. Give people a moment to gather their thoughts. Stop recording.